Well, I'll never ever forget getting the Weekly Mail, this newspaper that was the alternative press. It was something different. It was something radical. It was something exciting, funny, irreverent, and in the middle were these cartoons that I just could not believe. I mean, I'd studied architecture. I wanted to be a cartoonist. I had my studies interrupted by the army. I'd got involved in the United Democratic Front and ECC. So that's 83, 84. Suddenly in 85 and into 86, there was the Derek Bauer burst on the scene like this meteor. And his drawings were like that pyrotechnic, fantastic, like searing, brilliant. And I thought, geez, where did this guy come from? And I could see the massive influence of Stedman. I mean, he actually once said to me when I talked to him about Stedman, he said, I'd kiss the ground that Stedman pissed on, which kind of said it all about this. And in a way, like all of us, he was for a while almost over-influenced by Stedman. And he actually also said that, he's trying to work it through his system. But unlike the rest of us, he had a graphic ability that was so immense that he actually eventually, even while he was drawing like Stedman, he was making it his own. And then eventually moved beyond that. And so that period, sort of 85, 86, I think he was almost over-influenced by Stedman in his own, by his own admission. And then it became something different. And it was, I mean, there's never been anything like Derek in South Africa before or since. And in my opinion, but the best graphic cartoonist in terms of sheer graphic ability that we've ever seen in this country.
And it's I mean, we can go back to that as well. But my first kind of I suppose introduction to it. I mean, I was much younger than you, obviously. So I was in high school, in the late 80s, and I'd seen the Mail and Garden cover, but nothing really, I don't remember anything really grabbing me as it did to you. And then one day when his stuff was republished in the August, this was probably like we kind of estimated about 89 possibly, when that cartoon about Sire, the people have come to say goodbye, appeared. And I think I almost remember it like it was yesterday. I mean, I think it was on the front page. It wasn't in the newspaper. I think they actually used it on the front page. Although I can't be totally sure, but I almost, it was that.
Was it in the August?
It was in August.
It was in August.
It was in August. Yeah,
that's where I saw it. Yeah, I've forgotten that wasn't a Weekly Mail cartoon.
Well, I mean, I wasn't sure of the relationship at the time. So I mean, I would have been 18 or 17.
Yeah.
And when I saw that, I mean, it just it was. I looked at it and thought, wow, that's, I don't think I'd probably seen his stuff before, but never really sort of registered with me or sort of, reverberated with me or whatever. So when I saw this one, I thought, gosh, that is so funny. I mean, it's
brilliant.
Brilliant. And it just, I think I was sitting there looking at paper with my jaw on the, having fallen down. And
this one says Weekly Mail, but that doesn't mean that you're wrong.
No, it was definitely the August. It was not.
So no, okay. Now I'm going to go with your memory on that because these things have a serious impact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's where I saw it. So I know it was not the Weekly Mail. I mean, I'd seen it before. So, and then at that point, I thought, wow, this is like the drawing is incredible. I mean, that's one, but it's such a good joke. It's like, it is really something, and it's like so disarming. I mean, it's like so cute and funny. I mean, these little characters, and I thought, and by then, I mean, we grew up in kind of different times, I suppose, and my only real kind of avenue into cartooning at the time, up to that age, was when I was growing up, I got a copy of Giles' annual, when I was about 8 years old or something, and that stayed with me. That was probably my biggest influence at the time.
Also
So,
mine. I
yeah,
mean, to start
yeah,
with,
yeah.
Giles was my first influence too.
Yeah, that's cool. I'll tell you a little funny story about that too. But then just seeing that cartoon that day made me decide that I want to be a cartoonist. I mean,
Wow.
it made me think I could draw, and
Yeah.
if you could make things like this is the thing.
Oh, well, I suppose
Yeah.
with Derek, I mean, for me, it wasn't one single cartoon like that, but that thing of seeing his stuff in 1985, that definitely pushed me, pushed me towards really trying to become a newspaper cartoonist as opposed to doing stuff for political organizations, which is what I was doing 83, 84 and into 85. And the one other thing is that I talked about Derek being influenced by Stedman, and his being able to transcend that. But I was very into Stedman, but in a way I became more influenced by Derek's version of Stedman, that 85, 86 period. I actually liked his stuff for South Africa in a way better than Stedman. I mean, because there was something, there was a bit of a difference. I mean, Stedman's stuff is phenomenal, but Derek was doing something that I remember the particular drawings that I just sat and looked at. I mean, there's in fact, some of these little things here. I mean, I'll never forget looking at
Gerald's scarf
this drawing.
Yeah. Just talking about the Stedman.
It's slightly different from Stedman. I don't know what it is, but it's very Stedman style. But there's something in it, and there was some. Your scarf was also.
Yeah, he was
Gerald's
also,
scarf was a big influence. Yeah, look at this one here. This one. I mean, it's got an element of political incorrectness.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's this thing. It's kind of politically incorrect, but there's something absolutely amazing about the detail, like all the little bits and pieces, and it's not quite Stedman. And he was using the dreaded Marxist forces strike again. So he's doing that kind of heavy irony, and he was a bit heavy on the because he wasn't good on nuance, Derek. But just I just looked at that drawing. I remember sitting looking at that drawing for hours, and there were many drawings like that were just. So I was over influenced by his style. Okay. That's a big thing for me at the beginning, and he also kind of rapped me over the knuckles once in 87 when I was starting to do drawings for South, and Derek kind of he sort of said that he's going to. What did he said? He'll break my drawing hand, break the knuckles of my drawing hand, and it was a stylistic thing that I was picking. I couldn't for a while I couldn't avoid it almost. The thing is, I think every one of us goes through those periods.
Absolutely.
But the thing is that what worries me about some of the cartoonists now is that there are people who don't even try to get beyond that, and it stays for a long time, and you see hell of a lot of copying of caricatures, copying of styles, copying of actual cartoon ideas. That really, really worries me. So a short stylistic influence, as Derek had from Stedman, and I'm not comparing the quality of my drawings to the quality of his drawings. Then my drawings, as I've got lots of other strings to my bow, but the actual sheer drawing ability that he had was above anything that we could do. But so I was influenced for a while, and then I moved beyond that. I tried to find other things that were actually more me.
I mean, I think we also had this discussion when I was sort of still getting into it, and he also took me gently aside and said,
I actually remember that there was these things are going to happen. I remember saying because there were, and it was a deadline issue. You had and I remember you said I was on deadline, and I needed it. You had done such a good caricature of this, and I said, yes, I know, but I spend hours on these things,
and you had the only photograph I remember.
Yes, I said, well, I actually freeze framed on the television in those days, on a video, and I said, you've got to find your own stuff, which you absolutely did. Boy, oh boy, did you. But we all have those things.
You all, yeah, exactly.
And but Derek looms very large on our.
And
on
I mean
our
that's also part to
history.
to our history. I mean, you studied architecture. I mean, I studied graphic design, but we couldn't go to cartooning school.
Yeah.
I mean.
Well, I think that's the case. Interestingly, when
Yeah.
I met Uderzo in 1981, I went and I knocked on his door I rang his doorbell at 11 o'clock at night in Paris. Because I kind of got lost. But I wanted to speak to someone. I was trying to think about getting into cartooning, and I got lost, and I made that decision to actually bloody ring the bell at 11 o'clock at night. I still can't believe I did that. And he was fantastic to me, although he couldn't speak English. But his daughter translated when she luckily came home at the same time. But I asked him, that was the question. I said, where does this incredible style that a lot of the European cartoonists have, this French, Belgian style, where does it come from? I mean, do you study for it? And basically it was a kind of apprenticeship thing. And nowadays, I think, certainly within the next decade, things shifted a lot, so that there are schools. There's schools in the United States. There's schools in Europe. There are things that you can actually do it. But in the past, you really just absorb from the masters, or you have a sort of apprenticeship.
Yeah, I mean, this is like all I had when I that cartoon that day. I looked at it, and that's what you start with.
Yeah,
just what you see, and you think, okay, let me try and do that. Let me try and copy that. I mean, funny enough, that started my journey, and before that I hadn't even considered it. It wasn't even something I'd thought of before. Whereas I played around with comics and copied Asterix and all that stuff, and I could kind of copy almost everybody. But that's the first time I realized this is about thinking, and it's about coming up with ideas and ways of seeing things that are completely different. So and there was nobody. I mean, luckily I could reach out to you a few years later and say, when your stuff started appearing. I'll just tell you a little story about your stuff. I used to go to this shop in town for supplies, Sigma Graphics. Do you remember that?
Absolutely.
and
EST Graphics and Sigma Graphics. They're the only places we could go.
So
and Ozilid, you could get a few things.
So I used to go there quite often to get stuff done. And then one of the guys called. He got to know me. I think his name was I can't remember his name. Was Gary or something. So he called me over and he said, "Come see this." And it was one of your cartoons, that you had faxed from there to the Mail and Guardian, obviously.
Oh,
so
yes,
he said,
that's right.
"Check this out." And then, because he knew I was
faxed from a shop. I had to go down. I had to go to a shop and fax it to the thing. Yeah. And Derek told me, by the way, that he actually had to get these things to the courier to take them up to Joburg by plane. Sorry, but carry on about that. So I'd faxed this from Sigma Graphics to
it was. I remember being this guy showing the back, sort of saying, obviously it was client confidentiality was completely broken at that point. But he knew I was interested in this, so he showed me, and it was one on Buthelezi, something about the kingdom. I can't remember the details, but it's one of yours. So and then that's when I thought I must get hold of this guy. I mean, this is.
I remember when you did actually.
Yeah, that was that's what started that.
You came around to visit me in Tammerslip.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That whole thing about the relationship with editors is something that Andy Mason has looked at a lot in this book. What's So Funny? Andy, I think for the first time, unlike previous books like this one, Pen Pricks and others. Things that have been written about South African cartooning. I think Andy really tried fully to understand the differences between the Afrikaans press and the English liberal press and the alternative press, and then also bring in the relationship with comics and other things. But let's say if you're dealing with the press itself, the Afrikaans press was very much, and still is to some extent, but certainly in those days it was, National Party times, apartheid era. There was very little independence of the cartoonist from the editorial line. They'd actually be in those meetings, and the cartoonists in the liberal press, the English press, liberal, whatever you want to call it, but in the English press and the Afrikaans press, most of the cartoonists were actually part of the staff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's with the alternative press, things started to get a little bit more independent, and Derek was very much part of that. So until the 80s, essentially you had people who were on the staff, but the Afrikaans cartoonists were absolutely taking their editorial line from the editors. I never understood how they worked. I mean, I thought it must have been very difficult to do that. I would hate to do that. And the English press, to varying degrees, was much more. There was a little bit more independence. People were kind of a little bit more free agents. I mean, my big hero is not the one that you find in a lot of the books that were written about cartooning until the 80s were very focused on Joburg. So you'd find Bob Connolly, and you'd find whatever there were various people who and yeah, Connolly's good. Or to me, David Morea was head and shoulders above any of those cartoonists in the 50s, 60s, 70s. That he died in the 70s, but he was somebody who was very independent and left of the actual paper as well, and a journalist by training. So he wasn't necessarily the greatest draftsman, but you'd find other people like Jackson in the Argus, who were absolutely brilliant draftsmen, but quite like very
quite insipid almost. Yeah,
like good on broad anti-apartheid. So that they were classic liberals, and good on the broad anti-apartheid stuff, but actually very reactionary on the world and on the United Nations and on African independence and on communism and on all of that sort of stuff. So Jackson was a typical example of a sort of fairly bigoted liberal. How's that? I mean, that's a sort of thing that you get I suppose a reflection of society. That's why David Morea stood way above these people. There were other people like Abe Berry you couldn't call bigoted. Abe Berry was also a good progressive cartoonist of that era, but much more independent of the newspapers, of the editorial line. In the alternative press, that started to shift, and Derek was a major part of that, and I tried to come in on his coattails, working then in South, and then carving out that kind of niche of not being part of the newspaper at all and being very independent. So Derek called that thing Derek Bauer's world, and then I then have maintained a very fierce independence from the editorial line in all the many newspapers I've worked in, and I think that's helped some of. Derek's the one who paved the way, and then I made it my business to keep on paving the way on that, and I think that's helped some of the younger cartoonists now to keep their line quite separate from the papers.
And funny enough, as someone who works in the Afrikaans press currently, and I mean I started doing that in I think 2007 or 6 with Report, and the cartoon came down from the editor's office, already done. Here's the text, here's the thing, and then that didn't really work. So we've changed it to where I come up with the idea.
I'm glad. Was it like lame as hell? Pathetic. It's
really
often like that. You get something from the editors. That's why I don't understand even how somebody like Fred McTon.
Yeah, he still does that.
He still he's worked like that, and he somehow makes it work for him. Because he's sort of absorbed it into his
drawing.
Psyche. And he does the most incredible drawings.
Incredible stuff.
But I wouldn't like to work like that. Interestingly, as Andy has pointed out, Die Burger has had, it's probably set a world record. 3 cartoonists, 3 editorial cartoonists in over a century.
That's insane,
It's incredible. Boonzaier, Hannibal, and Fred McTon.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Longevity.
That is quite something,
But just on the the relationship with the editor and Derek, I mean, I have some personal experience of where things were going, and of, Derek had a period of about 5 years where he was unbelievably creative. It was like the juices were flowing. His drawing was phenomenal at 85, 86, 87, 88, 89. Unbelievable. I mean, I envied 80% of what he did. You see, there was always that stuff. He would always do stuff that I didn't like. And he would always draw it well, but there was sort of ideologically, he was all over the place. Yeah, that wasn't his strength. He was an anarchist. He would break everything down, and he was brilliant at it. And the editors in the alternative press, that's what they needed, and that's what the Weekly Mail needed. And Derek was perfect for that 5-year period.
Yeah.
He started during that period also then doing stuff in the Argus, and I think his stuff never really sat. I loved what he did, but it never really sat so brilliantly in the Argus, because he wasn't really. I mean, the Argus. You look at the Argus, you look at the kind of content, you look at the who they're appealing to, the sort of dumbed down semi-tabloid
fit. Huh? Yeah.
Weird. So, and I think already I started to see that some of the drawings in the Argus were great, and others he was having to kind of like force feed him, the shoehorn himself into that newspaper. And I think some of his, there was a sort of a dissonance that started there somehow, even during his brilliant creative period. Then later than that, when I started, no, not later. It's still in the. Let me think. I went to the United States. There's a whole lot of other stuff that happened with Derek. But then when I came back, that's when I wanted to try my hand in the Argus. Derek was doing. He had done 3 a week in the Argus, and I think it was no surprise that he suddenly was doing 1 a week there. I think that he was too hot to handle for them. So he was doing a Saturday cartoon in the Argus. And I wanted to then pick up a couple of cartoons in the Argus. I thought, that's great. If he's not doing those, let me start out there. I went and I showed my portfolio. So this is the early 90s somewhere. Where was it? Sort of 91, 92, something like that. And they said, oh, it's great stuff. We'd really like to have you. And we'd like to have you on Saturday. So I said, Saturday? But that's Derek's slot. And they said, no, we'd like you on Saturday. So I said, but I don't want to replace Derek. I can't replace him, and I don't want to. And I then, I phoned him, and I didn't actually speak to him because he wasn't around. I spoke to his then wife, Sue, who I knew as well. And I said, Sue, did Derek want that slot? Oh, absolutely. So I said, well, I'll just tell you that they just offered it to me. And so I said, no. I went back to them and I said, look, I'd like another day. Can't you do it? And they said, no. They were clearly trying to kind of replace him. I think he was, as I said, I think he was too hot to handle. But I also think in the 90s, his work was starting to deteriorate because he wasn't as interested in the nuance that came about from the time of the release of Mandela and the unbanning the organizations and all that. I started to see a disturbing lack of nuance and a lack of interest in his drawings. Anyway, I stepped back there and I said, no, I'm not going to do it. But about a year later, I got a phone call from the Mail and Guardian. Well, it was the Weekly Mail becoming the Weekly Mail and Guardian, and then eventually the Mail and Guardian. I got a call from Erwin Manoyem. And I spoke at that time to both Erwin and Anton Harbour. But Erwin was the one who said to me, we'd like you to become the Mail and Guardian cartoonist. And I said, what about Derek? They said, yeah, well, no, that was early 94. I said, well, we've been, Derek's great, but we've been thinking about this for about 3 years. And then I thought, I'm not going to stand back because I'm not going to do it a second time. And for me, I'd already kind of felt like Derek he had stamped this indelible stamp, and there's these hundreds of unbelievable drawings for that period from sort of 85 to 90-ish. And I thought, well, if I gathered that he was a bit focused on his T-shirt stuff, and he was not really interested in the nuance of the new South Africa. or the developing new South Africa. So yeah, it was very, very tough, because I then, at that point, I said yes, and then I took that on, and my first drawing was an absolute nightmare. It was abysmal. I had stage fright, and then within the next week and after that, I did some of the best drawings I've ever done, and I took that thing and I ran with it, and Derek was absolutely furious, because he knew that there'd been a previous occasion when I'd stood back, and then now suddenly I was kind of usurping his spot. The big spot was the Male and Guardian one, and it was incredibly difficult, because I never really had the chance to really talk it through with him, or how that worked, but because he moved to Joburg, and then I heard he'd moved back to Cape Town, and then I heard that he had the accident and he died. And I have such enormous respect for him, and I'd had some incredible experiences with him, which I could tell you about. But that's how it lives. This thing lives with me. It's the shadow of Derek and what happened, because that was the beginning of my real. I mean, I'd been a cartoonist in the 80s, but that Male and Guardian thing really took me into another realm, and I was able to kind of work with the new South Africa it was the most important thing for me. And then shortly after that, the Sowetan, and those two papers were kind of nourished my stuff for a decade, until I left the Sowetan and then went on to other things as well. So that's it's a big scar for me, that I never really got to speak to Derek about that, and to tell him again how much I admired what he'd done over that sort of 5-6 year period. I mean, he's a superstar.
Well, funny, talking about this period where Derek seemed sort of, kind of out of odds with the New South Africa. I mean, that's kind of when I tried to get in, trying to start getting my work into newspapers. And I felt at the time it was really difficult. It was a really difficult time to enter. I mean, there was, you had all this sort of struggle stuff coming through, becoming, formalized, and all the structures and all those people kind of becoming slightly, entrenched. And then there was still the old regime who was still in charge, but that, they were being lauded for what they'd done. They were kind of untouchable in a sense for having done the right thing. So when I was looking around, at newspapers, actually there were no cartoonists. I mean, there were in August they weren't publishing any. In the Cape Times, I remember. Well, there was Grogan, obviously, but the August specifically. I mean, it was what I was looking at. Like, like you were too. There was nothing in there, no cartoons whatsoever. So, but it was really difficult for me coming from nothing into that sort of vacuum, and thinking, okay, well, I'm sure they could use a cartoonist because there's nobody there. But the stuff that was going on was so abstract. It was really tough. I mean, I remember that it was really I kind of defaulted to international stories because that was far more easy. Bosnia and Haiti and the Gulf War, all that sort of stuff was much more interesting, and you could work with it in a way. But the stuff here was like I really struggled. I mean, I really struggled to kind of get a handle on it, and not even. I mean, this is '94, so when things changed, it didn't become any easier either. It was still hard. So once the TRC got going, things got a little more interesting, I think. But yeah, there was at that period. Yeah. I mean, that sort of 90 to 94 was a really strange time. I
have a slightly different memory of that, not radically different. It's just that I think I got my chances. I was a bit older than you, and I'd already had quite a period in the 80s where I'd absorbed a lot, and I'd been to study in America and all of that. So by the time 94 came, I got cracking rock immediately. As I said, the first cartoon in the the old Weekly Mail. If anyone wants to go and look for it,
What was the
I'm
book?
not showing it. It was like, you know, when you get stage fright and then you spend the whole night and you try and put everything in case you missed something.
Yeah, sure.
And it's like, it started out okay, and then it was like I added that level and that and that, and you add and add and add, and eventually it's like a bloody dog's breakfast, and it was terrible. So, but immediately after that, I actually found, even though it was the new South Africa and I was part of where things were going and all that, I actually found it difficult to sometimes to satirize some of the people that I knew, that I'd been involved with in this, but I found ways to do it. I found, and I found, if you look at the cartoons that I did Mandela had been president only for a month or two, and I was already talking about Joe Modise, and I could see that I knew that he was corrupt. I knew that he was a hawk. I went for him. I went for the potential corruption. I went for the arms trade. I found ways to use Mandela and Tutu already back then to kind of offset some of the other things. Even though Mandela was president, and some of the stuff, he was actually responsible for some of it. Tutu more as an outsider. I've got one that I'm very proud of from that period, where Tutu is waving his finger like this, and he said, "Stop!" He's saying to these ANC fat cats. This is from '94, like mid '94. I mean, Mandela's president for like 2 months, and Tutu's saying, "Stop! Cut thy salary. Stop thy arms trade. Cut thy salaries," or something, you know. And one of the fat cats looks at the other, and he said, "Desmond's pulling rank on." It's one of those lines. It's his relationship with God. You know, he's got the God thing. I'm not doing my own cartoon justice, but the point is that using those people as foils to say stuff about the people who were already bullshitting us, already corrupt, already becoming fat cats, already forgetting the kind of struggle values and all that. But there was a vacuum period for me that came before that. That period, 1990 to 93 or something. I did feel a bit of that vacuum. Go back to the 80s. That period of the 80s where you had Derek Bauer, and Derek Bauer working initially very much in the Stedman style, and then his version of the Stedman style with spatter. Remember, that's a whole lot of that for Gerald Scarfe and Ralph Stedman in particular. Stedman in particular, the spatter was a huge thing. And Derek was also working in that. And you had to be really good to do that well. I mean, so I tried some of that stuff. And it was a
toothbrush, was it?
Yeah, I did okay, reasonably well, the toothbrush and all that. But you know, and a little bit of stuff. But to really make that work, you've just got to feel it. And I mean, Derek felt it, and it's a period where Andy describes in this book again. He said it's a period where the ink turned to blood, and that was so nice because in that period you had that thing that came out of a savage British English understanding of satire. It worked incredibly well for the South African setup. None of the mainstream cartoonists was doing anything like that. So Derek was the one who pushed that, and then I followed suit. I tried that, and then Chip came on the scene, and Chip also worked in that style. So you had Andy's analysis of it was the ink turns to blood, and stylistically we were getting it initially from Britain, and then and Derek was channeling that, but we were all trying. It worked well. We were drawing hangmen and the apartheid butchers and all of that stuff, and you've got drawings that are spattered and savage and dark. And then, as I said, I was kind of over influenced by Derek at that point, and then I quickly realized that I've got to actually be different. First of all, because I can't. I don't want to be too influenced by any one person. I want to get my own style. But I also realized that in order to actually communicate with readers, I want to be more accessible. And then when I studied in the US in that period, I mean, I had my period of activism. I was more an activist than a cartoonist in a sense. For from 83 to about 88. I mean, I was a cartoonist. I was working for struggle organizations, but in the alternative press, and then and then working for the actual organizations. But I wanted more accessible stuff. When I studied in America and I looked at the American cartoonists and how well they communicate, some of it in a very banal way, and some of them transcend that and are very brilliant. I mean, there's like a small proportion of American lefty cartoonists, or good, really good, solid, progressive cartoonists who actually use those more accessible styles to communicate phenomenally well. And that's what I drew on that. When I came back, I had that sort of stylistic stuff that I could do, but then there was the political vacuum. And I found that period 1990 to 91, call it, to 93, I ended up doing educational comics. And I noticed that the newspapers were kind of getting rid of the cartoonists, and they were just, that part's the same. I think I just got my mojo back a little quicker because I had a bit more stuff to draw on. And then there was that period, 94, 95, 96. I mean, I share your feeling that things had changed in the sense that it was kind of difficult to satirize some of the people. But I found that using the protagonists in like Madiba, like the Arch, some of the good guys, putting them in a position where you see the choices that they have to make. That was a very conscious decision that I made. I remember Jeremy Cronin writing an article about some of my work in the Sunday Independent back then, in about 97, where he actually picked that up. And I thought it was interesting, that he's being a poet and all that, and also into kind of nuance. He picked up that that's what I was doing. And it was a conscious decision. That was a way that I could handle the time when I was actually broadly in line with where the country was going. And I didn't have to. An American cartoonist at the time actually said to me, every cartoon is a political assassination. And I said, I don't actually feel that. I think we're at a period where there is more nuance, and I think we can handle that. But then, of course, from around about 99, 2000, I reckon that's when it shifted. There's a clear shift back towards feeling, what the hell is going on now? I've got to go for the jugular. I don't know.
There's
so now kind of things are back. We're back like with both barrels firing every day, to the point where you can go over and over and over and do stuff again. I'm sure you feel the same thing.
Exactly.
Do you like feel that? Like you do a cartoon and then you think, Jesus, I was doing this like 5 years ago, 10 years ago. How many more times have we got to see this stuff?
Yeah, the Zuma no confidence thing is case in point. You're like, what? How many more times can you do that? You've been doing it through his whole presidency. I mean, you've been doing you did your kind of political assassination one before you even became president.
I reckon my first critical cartoon of Zuma. You know how long ago it was? Around corruption.
2004 or 5.
End of 2002.
Yeah, sure.
And we're sitting with this bastard. End of 2002. In 2000, at the end of 2002, I came up with a cartoon that was as savage as the Lady Justice one. It was Zuma basically getting a blowjob from the arms deal.
I remember that one.
And that one, well, initially it didn't get published. Mondley was the editor of the Mail and Guardian.
Okay.
I sent the drawing to him. I faxed the drawing to him. And actually one of my favorite little stories. I have two phones. I have a phone outline and a phone inline. And only my editors and a couple of people have the phone outline, because I make calls. So very seldom I get calls on that line. And it's a little high-pitched, funny, in those days, a funny little high-pitched phone. And I'd faxed the drawing, the rough of Zuma he's like sitting back in his chair like this. And the guy's knocking on the door saying, "Sir, your speech as head of the moral regeneration movement is ready." And the second man, he said, "Coming," and he's sitting there. I always say, "Think Monica Lewinsky," because it's like slightly hidden in the drawing. Anyway, so I send the fax, and I'm busy doing another drawing, and this little high-pitched phone goes, and ding, and I've got a pen in my mouth, pick up the phone, and a voice says, "You are one sick mother." And I said, "You mean we can't use it?" He said, "No." He said, "There's a pause in it." He said, "But don't give it to anyone else."
Okay.
So I said, "What, do you think it could get that bad?" So he says, "Yeah, we'll see." So that's the end of 2002. Anyway, couldn't do it, did other stuff, whatever. A number of months later, I'm sitting at my drawing board on just an ordinary day, busy drawing. The little high-pitched phone goes, beep, pick it up, and a voice says, "It's time." I said, "For the Zuma drawing?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Yes." We published it in Mondley was the editor of the Mail and Guardian then, and I didn't get sued. And that was 2003.
Yeah, wow.
So yeah, it's
it goes back, eh?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I was talking about editors and stuff. I mean, so going through those sort of early years, being working as a freelancer. So, I mean, you started that anyway, so you weren't. It took sort of several days before you could find out that they didn't publish your cartoon.
Yeah.
Remember.
And for various reasons.
For various reasons, yeah.
Well, they pulled it. They censor some of your stuff, or what?
They would say they tend to. So usually mine was in I guess in their defense in some way. A lot of my early stuff was pretty convoluted. I mean, you kind of picked it up as well. You see, sometimes it wasn't too clear. There was,
But did they use that to kind of to mask things?
That's the thing.
Yeah, because that's a different issue.
Yeah. So see, you wouldn't mind if it was totally clear. This is why we're not. But usually you had to kind of go find them and go and sit. And yet it wasn't easy to do that. So they kind of just disappeared, and you wouldn't be able to find out why they didn't publish it. So you couldn't really build on that. Like, okay, what do we do? So I kind of make my. But what I was trying to say was I kind of developed quite a defense in terms of actually working with editors in that sense. So I mean, like now, I don't do any of that sort of send my idea to the editor early in the day sort of to get them to okay it or tell me more or less what direction I should go. I mean, I literally send the cartoon before publication. They have no idea what I've been doing. Or
I've done that a hell of a lot of the time as well.
And that's kind of that's kind of where I'm.
Except, what happens if you've got something that is like is seriously explosive and potentially could draw a lawsuit? I mean, don't you at that stage?
Then, that point,
because otherwise they'd freak out.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done that quite a bit now. Mm-hmm. I mean, I tend to, for the dailies when I was doing like a Sowetan, I started out having these at least a couple of times a week. I'd have these conversations with them, and I remember when Barney Mtomboti was at the Sowetan, that sort of, it was very nice. I'd have these very good discussions with him, and Muhsin, can you believe it? Muhsin was my editor at South, the deputy editor.
Right.
Absolutely loved having him around. He was really supportive, struggle person. Then at the Sowetan, he got me in the Sowetan, and I had good discussions with him. Then he was at the Argus and the Cape Times at various times when I was involved, and also when he went to the Star. So I mean, 4 or 5 newspapers, and over a 20-year period. And then Muhsin, something happened to him in around 2007, 2008. He just turned. He just became captured, and I could see there was something terrible happening. Something terrible happening. The last decade, I mean, Muhsin has been right in the pocket of the Guptas. It's bizarre. It's much worse when you see somebody like that as a trusted struggle comrade than other people. I mean, with Muhsin, I've never understood. Jimmy Matthews. What happened to Jimmy Matthews? It was appalling. And Jimmy, I mean, I think Jimmy's like torn up and dealing with his conscience and all of that, but he's still also that was terrible. But the thing about that, I used to have those discussions with the Sowetan and with doing the daily stuff. The weekly stuff I would I mean, and then eventually, sorry, I'm kind of losing my train of thought here. I'd have those discussions with them, and then eventually it kind of gradually it sort of, they almost fell away.
Yeah.
And then I'd be doing 5 cartoons a week, just sending the stuff through on deadline, or past deadline, and then only if something is really controversial, I would speak to them about it. Whereas with the weeklies, I tend to have discussions. Again, it's not to tell me what to do, but I say, well, look, I'm interested in about 3 of the different, maybe 3 or 4 different subjects. I don't know how the cartoon's going to pan out, or whether they'll be connected, or whatever, you know. And that's the way I've tended to work. And I've developed a very good relationship with most of the editors, so that issue of the censorship thing, I don't. When I hear some of the younger cartoonists complaining about like being censored, I feel that usually you can sort of obviate that problem. You can get over it at an earlier stage. If you've got something that's really difficult, you send it, and then sometimes that process of actually working it through with the editor is a very good one, and they can actually temper some of the things that you do, and you can actually come out with something stronger. I really believe that. I'm not just saying.
No. That's how I operate as well. If there's something that would potentially be a little controversial, or they might not get the, if it's got too many kind of what's the word, like you could take it in either direction. It's a bit too dubious. Then I would also kind of do that. Send them the sort of drawing early on, and sort of say, any thoughts on this?
Imagine an editor trying to do that with Derek.
I
mean, you see, Derek's stuff was so anarchic and so idiosyncratic that again, when he was on, I mean, he was like absolutely searingly on, but it was quite personal. It was quite personal. If you can be personal and anarchic at the same time, well, I think you can. But trying to sort of control him or say, I don't think that is going to work, and I think that must have been very difficult. So imagine when he was working at the Argus, they must have torn their hair out. We can't publish something so kind of ugly and brutal and personal, and kind of, what does it mean, and all that kind of stuff. He was that kind of guy, and I must say, in a way, as a cartoonist, I never wanted to be what he was. I thought that he was utterly brilliant at what he did, but for me, I wanted to kind of communicate more directly and actually say what I actually meant, or have most people look at it and kind of understand what I actually meant. So that the kind of wildness of the sort of interpretation that you could draw out of that style of cartooning was partly what pushed me away from it. I wanted to be something different, but I still look at the stuff and I absolutely marvel at the emotions and the power and the pyrotechnics and that like when he had it, when he got it, the whatever would be the sort of sarcasm, the irony, the kind of viciousness, it's all, a lot of things of like cutting off hands, cutting off noses, stabbing yourself, or doing an injury to yourself. Very much out of the
sort of thing, falling on your sword.
And then again, like with spatter and with kind of, and it was the text as well.
The way he wrote that as well.
The text, kind of, it's really stunning.
So I mean, seeing that and trying to develop my sort of stuff, seeing your stuff. I mean, your stuff was like also had that same, you also were going for the same sort of feel at the time, and I'm left-handed, so I tried to do the pen and ink thing for many years. I mean, I struggled with that for forever. So it's like pushing, digging into the paper, going backwards. So I always struggled with it. It never quite felt right for me, but those were the tools. I mean, that's what people used. So I tried move towards brushes later. Didn't quite go with that. But then when when I could have got an opportunity to work on a computer, that just kind of clicked for me. So and that's how I found that direction. And
I always think it's like swings and roundabouts. I mean, I admire the fact that you can do those things. You pull off a color drawing so easily, and there's a stylistic slickness that you develop and all of that. And unlike some of the other cartoonists around, you haven't lost the edginess of your drawing. I mean, some of the people they flatten out the stuff, and it becomes too kind of ad agency slick. And especially that coloring book thing, especially if your color sense isn't brilliant. There are one or two of them who've got a great color sense, one or two of the cartoonists who do that, and some whose color sense is a bit weird. And then so the colors, it's like too easy access to every color, and you don't get a kind of a palette that works. But you've actually got your palette right. You still have edginess in your drawing, so that works. The problem for me is like I don't want to lose an original. I want to have originals. I mean, there are things like, okay, I mean, there's some of these prints and things which this one is sitting here. I think somebody bought this one. I mean, this one's covered in plastic, so I'll take it out. But this is where I work with a colorist because I'm so crap at actually doing it myself. But this is where, you know, I worked with Andrew Pato on this, and I worked with Robbie Milan, Roberto, he calls himself. So nowadays I work with them, but I have to sort of sit with them, and it's kind of weird. I just haven't learned to do this stuff myself. So I do that every now and then, but I also still paint when I want to do it, or sometimes just do black and white drawing. But I want to have an original.
Yeah, that's a whole thing I haven't really. But to me, I mean, you know, the drawing part is sort of half the process for me, and the other part is the painting, which I call the painting because that's how I approach it. It's not kind of a coloring in kind of thing, which kind of makes it different to a lot of other stuff out there. So I mean, it's evolved. I mean, it evolves all the time. So it's not something that's sort of static. I don't have one way of doing things all the time. I think that.
I mean, you're much less of a dinosaur than I am. I mean, I'm very much part of that old period in the whatever it is, 70s, 80s. I mean, I use there are things there are techniques I use here and there, but I'm very much part of that. I think Chip also is now able to do a whole lot of other things, but he, in his drawing style, and the fact that he stuck things onto the drawings and, you know, started drawing and then get bigger and bigger and stick little extra bits on it. I mean, he was also very much like Derek, and he has quite a facile ability with a pen, which I think Chip is more like Derek than I ever became, in a sense. I mean, he's probably the closest version we have to Derek, and also sometimes that kind of intensely personal thing, which doesn't always communicate as directly with the reader. There are shifts in the body politic, and shifts in the way that people are, in the way that discourse is conducted, that actually are sometimes counterintuitive. You'd think it was harder in the 80s and all that. Actually, I mean, with a common enemy, everyone from sort of liberals to hard left and radical and you know, socialist, communist, everybody who you'd have any respect for was against apartheid, and then had various versions of attacking. And so in a way that was the easy thing. That's how you got the kind of reactionaries or sort of liberal reactionaries like John Jackson, doing good stuff on apartheid, and yet actually being quite reactionary in a whole lot of the other attitudes. That's how you got an anarchist like Derek, absolutely brilliant at breaking everything down, like being able to just keep on doing all of that stuff and not have to deal with too much nuance. That's how then you got, say, the activists like me. I was probably the only cartoonist who was an activist really first. I mean, as an editorial cartoonist in that 80s period, I saw myself more as an activist. So all of us able to do that stuff, some to greater effect than others, you know. But that's, and then you got, say, the classic liberals. I mean, more progressive than Jackson. Somebody like Tony Grogan in the Cape Times, and you know, so you could, everybody in some ways all pushing in a similar direction. Then there were a whole lot of things where I would go a lot further because that's part of my ideology or whatever. And then if you think about how easy that was to have a direction, then you get that period. We talked about the sort of vacuum period, you know, the transition period and early days of the new South Africa, where there were some things that were a bit harder. And then it became easier again to have an enemy, because the enemy now is the corrupt. And then something shifted again, and it became a bit more difficult again, in my opinion. And that is it's really social media. Social media has now dumbed down any kind of nuances that one would have in critique. So if you're criticizing the government of the day, you're criticizing the corrupt people within the new government, you know, of South Africa. Well, they're not new anymore, but the newish government. In the same way that cartoonists for centuries have criticized a government, then suddenly, if you're a white cartoonist, somebody on social media will go for you in a particular way, or if you're a black cartoonist, they'll go for you in another way. So you can be a racist, or you can be a coconut, or you can be whatever. And these things have really polluted, not only being a cartoonist, but they've polluted a whole lot of aspects of critique in the new South Africa, in my opinion. And of course, it's not just here; it's happening in many parts of the world. So I find that I'm now having to try and define the difference between self-censorship and emotional intelligence, if that makes any sense. It's like I'm saying, I'm having to sometimes say, I will not temper how far I'm prepared to go politically. I will attack Jacob Zuma and his cronies and his whatever until I'm blue in the face. But there are certain metaphors which are perfectly good, perfectly not racist, not anything, but I know that those ones will draw the opportunists. I'm holding my tongue. I can list you 10 of them. I'm not even going to give them the status of mentioning their names, but they are pathetic. And they will try anything to self-aggrandize and to destroy anyone, even if they know that that person is progressive, that there was nothing racist in it, whatever. And that's a real problem. The problem is that that's also polluted one of the great newspapers of the alternative press, and that's the Mail and Guardian. Mail and Guardian in the last few years, has really declined. I mean, the paper, the quality of the paper has declined. The number of the good journalists has declined. The editorship, I will mention one name, Varashni Pillay, the second to last editor. She had agendas within agendas. She was, I don't know, covering her back, her own back or arse, depending on what. And she, I think, really was trying to prove herself to young, more militant colleagues or something at the Mail and Guardian. I don't know exactly what their agenda was. And she decided that she would, in my instance, I mean, she kind of sacrificed me on the altar of political correctness, and around issues that occurred outside of the Mail and Guardian with other newspapers. And I went through hell, and then eventually I just stepped back. I said, I'm not prepared to take this anymore, and I left. Of course, they also then, I mean, I've been at that paper for 23 years. 23 years. And then the narrative that some of the cronies of her cronies and particular kind of group put out was that I'd been forced out. I didn't, I mean, as if I'd been fired or something, which is an absolute lie. I never was. I mean, when I look at what happened afterwards, I mean, she certainly covered herself in glory at the Huffington Post. She made a total mess. It was the same kind of I mean, the agendas that she had sort of clouded her judgment. With that, you nitpick through what happened there at the Huffington Post. It's a similar kind of thing. So I think it's a really sad thing. I'm still rooting for the Mail and Guardian. I hope they kind of come back. I don't really see huge signs of it. For me, it was absolutely clear that Daily Maverick was really a happening thing. tremendous spirit and fire and passion and integrity, and it's no accident that they're the ones who came up with the Gupta leaks and then made contact with Amar Bungani, which, by the way, had split off from the Mail and Guardian, and no accident. That it was a relatively short period that they'd split off from the Mail and Guardian, because they couldn't stand it anymore there either. Now there's this link between Amar Bungani and Daily Maverick, and they brought in Media 24 just because they're out of altruism. There's 200,000 at least leaked emails, and they need help. So that's where the good journalism is happening, at the moment. And the Mail and Guardian, every now and then a little bit here, a little bit there. But I think they're a bit of a spent force,
No, look, it's...
And good luck to Carlos Amato, who I really like, who's the new cartoonist at the Mail and Guardian, doing some interesting stuff there. But he's got to work with that.
Yeah, I guess... you can. I suppose you can become pretty cynical over time. But I think... they're interesting. I mean, just talking about another cartoonist not often chatty, but I have spoken to, Chip, for instance, and I think Jeremy also had a similar discussion about this, where feeling like they just can't do this anymore. It's kind of like every day, kind of dealing with all this negativity and trying to come up with
Jeremy. That's interesting that Jeremy said that, because Jeremy's a bit like Derek.
Exactly.
In that way. He's also kind of anarchist, and you'd think he kind of doesn't give a shit, in a way. That's the impression.
That's the impression
that's interesting that it had that effect on him.
He said the same thing. Like just this constant negativity. Kind of, I think he was pointing to personal relationships that didn't kind of work out because of that, and Chip talking about just the thought of getting up angry. I remember saying that, getting up angry and wanting to. And
I've heard Chip talk about that.
And that's always. I mean, I obviously could sympathise with that to some degree, but there's for me, this is a lot of fun. I mean, really. I mean, just the whole process of discovery and coming up with an idea, and so even if it's on negative stuff, you're kind of shifting it into different territories. So it's interesting.
I mean, I think Chip is one of those guys who's sort of salt of the earth, and kind of when he started out, he was quite religious, and he's that. So I can understand how. I remember him talking about that, and there's an earnestness about him, and about you don't want to see him deal in that kind of negativity. He's kind of a good soul. I'm not as good a soul, but in without saying that you're bad and I think we have we have a more of a similar outlook. I mean, it's kind of quite strongly analytical and very, very kind of anti-corruption, very in a way I think can dissociate. I mean, it sounds like from what you say. I can. That's not the personal cost for me.
No.
The like waking up in the morning and being outraged is a good thing for a cartoonist. That's cool. I'm fine with that. That's not the personal cost. I can work with that. That's not the personal cost. The personal cost is being obsessed. That is a personal cost.
Okay,
I'm obsessed, and I have never been able to. My biggest personal cost. Some people say, could it be the lawsuits? How about the death threats? How about being detained by security police? No, they're all bad, and those are part of personal. The death threats I shouldn't make light of, and I've had those, and that's seriously problematic. And there's some other stuff I'd say around that.
You get good death threats and you get bad.
Well, you get the kind of bluster death threats. I've had those. I will kill you if you do another drawing like that. And you get the serious, scary ones of the phone calls in the middle of the night, and the people watching your children and making phone calls to your children's schools and stuff. I've had all of that. That's definitely part of personal cost. I mean, I was going to shove that aside and talk about the biggest personal cost for me, which is the obsession, the time and the obsession and the second guessing and the deadlines and the past deadlines and the working into the night when I should be finished and spending 4 times as long on a drawing as I should, and not feeling like I've never learned how to actually control that. I'm out of control. After 30 years of doing this stuff, that is a huge cost. It's a huge cost. I feel like time lost, time. I've had the most incredible experiences. I've met people all over the world. I've been flown all over the world, but I still have that thing dragging me down. So that's my biggest personal cost. But back to those sort of death threat things, the viciousness the viciousness of the kind of reactions, whether it elicits something as bad as a death threat, or whether you are seen to be a traitor to the community that you're born into by accident of birth. I mean, for example, more than example, me and the Jewish community, I've had some very, very, very fraught problems, relationships with many people in the Jewish community, friends, family, extended family, around being savagely critical of Israel and being pro-Palestinian rights. And there's so many people in all sectors, whether it's religious or political, or if you part of a political organization, then start criticizing part of UDF, and then you're criticizing people within the ANC. But there are people who can't see beyond their own personal little psychosis. So that thing that you get where somebody says, "Now you've crossed the line," and you think, "Wow!" I mean, I just did a hard-hitting cartoon, but that crossed the line. It moved me into the area of enemy rather than opponent or debater.
Right.
That happens with people in different religions. And the next day they say, the same person you thought now you were dead to the world, to that person, you were dead to that person. They say, fantastic. Now there's somebody who hated what I did on Israel now absolutely loves what I did to Mugabe or Zuma. And then and so in a way you've got to trust yourself, because then those things, for example, the things that you do on Mugabe and Zuma can get picked up. I think one of the worst things that I have as well, the personal cost, is now that things have shifted back to kind of both guns blazing and everybody going for the jugular all the time. The white right has got hold of me, and they cherry pick my stuff, and I find the most vicious websites with my stuff, like where they've just cherry picked different things and somehow look like, well, Zapiro agrees with all our kind of racist stuff, because he's done this cartoon and that cartoon on this one on Malema and that one on Zuma and that one on Mugabe. And so that's one of the, I don't know whether you've found that. There's even a fake site now of mine.
Oh, really?
And we've tried to get Twitter to shut it down. I think some of the stuff with social media and the viciousness of the discussions, that's one of the biggest personal costs that I've come across. So there's a fake Zapiro site, and they take stuff and then they put stuff out, and people sometimes are not discerning, so they think I've actually put that out, even though it's not my signature. It's a different signature. It says Zapiro. And I would never draw like that, and I would never make those comments, but it's difficult because we try to get Twitter to shut them down, and for a while they did. Now they've come out and they call themselves better than Zapiro. Whatever that means, and but it's still really problematic. So those are some of the those are some of the things that make it kind of difficult.
I mean, I'm with you on the time spent worrying and obsessing about getting it absolutely right, and going through second guessing every possibility. I mean, that's it is, I guess, part of it, but I think also, the other thing that does, you kind of have to remind yourself that, well, I have to remind myself that, I'm still human, and I'm not an objective kind of onlooker on all this, and that I kind of have to remind myself that this affects me personally as well, and it's real. It's not some abstract thing. So like while I'm very analytical and rational about approaching it, I have to kind of I always have to kind of get back to feeling something about it.
I'm not when I say you and I can dissociate, I'm not saying that there's no I do sometimes feel it. I feel it a lot. I do sometimes feel when I do cartoons, I think, how can I even do a cartoon like that? I don't feel for the politicians and their families. It's not that when people say, "How can you do that to someone of the family?" It's not that. I'm feeling, how can I do this to the ANC? But the ANC has now become this something I don't like. How could I imagine my mother, who was, there's an ANC branch named after my mother, or imagine Madiba. But then I think that their values would have said, "No, you're right, do it." So that part, I can deal with that. One thing I haven't even mentioned is much now. I sort of said in passing is the lawsuits. That's not been so difficult for me. It's been harder for my family.
Yeah.
I mean, if you ask my wife Karina what the personal cost was, I mean, she might have a different approach to that than I have. I mean, for me, the first time I received the summons for the lawsuit, the first lawsuit in 2006, I do remember that. I mean, I remember the sheriff coming to the door, and then I felt like my stomach kind of went through the floor. But that lasted a couple of minutes, and after that, I said, "That bastard's suing me. Okay, now we'll see." And I just went for him even harder, and I've never looked back on that kind of stuff. I mean, then the lawsuit continued for 6 years, and I just went for him, and then Zuma, of course, and then the second time. He sued me in 2008. It was an even bigger issue. No, a smaller amount. The first one was 15 million.
Yeah, okay.
The second time was 7 million. And then
Smaller amount.
No, nothing. But it's all immaterial because he was never going to get that money. But the way I responded was to just keep going, really hard. And I don't regret that for a second. I mean, I actually had a couple of encounters with Zuma. One in person in 2006 when he sued me the first time, and one on radio when he sued me the second time. The first time I went to a Cape Town Press Club, and he didn't, and I just quickly got some accreditation because I don't really go to these press club things. So I walked in there, and then I'm sitting there in question time, and like, "Hi, I'm Zapiro. See, he's like, he actually did it, for a second. Zuma is like, he's not phased, but he kind of, you're suing me. You're the one who supports freedom of expression, or so you said in your last couple of speeches. And, what's that about? You're a politician, and you're the powerful politician. How can you sue somebody who's doing their job in media?" Anyway, wow, convolutions. I can't even remember his answer properly. He's like, The second time was a lot clearer because he said something hilarious to me
on radio.
I phoned Ridi. She was Ridi Direko then, Ridi Klabi, and I heard Zuma was on. So I phoned the producer. I said, I know that you must have a lot of people. Can you jump? So here it's out there now. They jumped the queue so that I could get a chance to speak to Zuma. And they jumped me on there. And I said, so Ridi says, it's Zapiro. And I said, "Hello, Mr. President." I think I call him Mr. President. Again, I said, "You're suing me now for the second time." And as I said to you back then, I'm a cartoonist. I'm doing my job. I'm supposed to, you're the one who supports freedom of expression, or so you say. And he said, "I saw the cartoons. I saw the cartoons." He was suing me for one cartoon. Then he says, "You are invading my dignity." So I said, yes. Wrote that down. Put that on the back of my next book. But yeah, he's impervious to. He's in a bubble. He's impervious to any kind of criticism. It's incredible.
Yeah, yeah.